and welcome to the Nature Garden Podcast with me, Carl Steinson, and the Weekending Show team from Lionheart Radio. It's a chance to take a wander down the garden path and country lane with the birds and the bees and the flowers and trees, and a chance to hear some stories from the past and present. In this episode, we're joining an amazing project that has helped ospreys to return to Northumberland. Tom Pattinson's here, full of sunshine, enjoying some warm gardening while keeping an eye on hazards. His advice could save your life. Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology is listening to birds and asking, well, why do they sing? Plus some top tips for the garden from Tom P. All coming up on the Nature Garden Podcast. The warm weather has been a joy after a rather chilly May, and it feels like, well, it's almost summer. The number of house martins this year, though, is less than last. Just one breeding pair on our windows. We were hoping for more, but I guess that's better than none. Now, millions of us love gardening. Newcomers are now aplenty post-lockdown, but newbies and veterans of the tool shed, pots and borders, beware. Tom Pattinson is here with some health and safety advice that really can help save accidents in the garden.
During the long period of lockdown, we were told stay at home, don't travel, keep yourself occupied the best way you can. And my goodness, I've never been more pleased to enjoy gardening than during this last year or so. It has been a lifeline. Talk about keeping my sanity. Excellent. And I'm not the only one in this. Over the year, apparently, the recent figures suggested there were 3 million new people joined gardening. And they were encouraged into this by television programs which said, when you're at home, yourself and the kids, why don't you grow one or two vegetables, very simple salad vegetables. They're so easy. Grow them in a container, outdoors, indoors. Give it a try. So people were instructed how to sow leaf lettuce and radishes. And even one of the programs I saw, Alan Titchmarsh, bless him, he was potting up strawberry plants. And of course, I've just been enjoying our early strawberry plants, put them in pots and grown from outside. Could have been grown in the house, I've done that before, or in the cold greenhouse. And they've just been ripened recently. So all of these things were to encourage us to go in the garden. And the garden it always has been seen as a serene place, a place where you can feel safe and relax and enjoy yourself. But you know, I don't like to spoil the party, but every year at this time, I think about how many newcomers we have to gardening, and I think about all the old comers, such as myself, who've been gardening for years. We let our guard down too far sometimes, and if we do that, we're in trouble. There is danger lurking in every garden, and danger a variety of ways in which you can harm yourself. And I'm backed up in this by the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, ROSPA for short. Each year they produce their figures, facts and figures for accidents in and around the garden. And the last figures I read were 300,000 people visited hospital with injuries that occurred in the garden. Almost a third of these happened while gardening or pursuing related do-it-yourself projects in the garden. And here's the most alarming bit. Children account for approximately 1/3 of the total injuries. Now that is sad and that is serious. So how do we begin to think about safety in the garden? Well, mine starts with tidiness. Tidiness is next to godliness. We'll keep the religion out of it. Tidiness. not leaving heaps of debris lying around. Canes, rolling canes, you can stand on them and they move and you fall down. Tools lying around, glass lying around, piles of rubbish on pathways. Garden tools is the obvious one, and quite amazingly, people still leave spades and forks leaning against a wall or just lying on the ground where they've left it. And of course the old music hall joke, I've seen it happen before. Someone gets a rake with the metal tines and the rest of metal tines on the ground and the rest, the long handle up against a wall. Someone else comes, not themselves, and stands on those metal tines, and the handle comes forward and hits them in the head or some part of their upper body. An accident waiting to happen. But it's not just those tools, it's power tools as well. Power tools are serious things to handle. Hedge cutters, electrically driven or petrol driven lawnmower or electrically driven. First of all, the electric bit. I always have a residual current device, an RCD fitted to the system. That's where the socket delivers the electricity. I have an RCD device, and I plug that in, and then I plug the actual device I'm using, say the hedge cutters, into that. And the difference this makes is, if there's any break or any accident at all with the blades that are turning to cut something, it cuts the electricity out immediately. Say you are cutting the hedge and you start talking to someone, it happens, and your cable is in front of you and you cut through the cable. Rather than giving you that fatal shock, it cuts out the electricity immediately. Buy an RCD, a residual current device. It could save your life.
The story of the return of the osprey to Northumberland is one of the success stories of conservation and groups working together. From annihilation to the wonder of new breeding pairs and chicks, the last dozen or so years have been, well, quite something. Here's Katie Bark from the Northumberland Wildlife Trust to tell us more about the brilliant return of the osprey to Kielder.
Hello, Carl. I'm coming to you from Kielder to tell you all about our ospreys. Now, I'm at Tawanow Visitor Centre. Well, I've taken actually a little short walk from Tawanow onto the peninsula, and I'm in this lovely little bit of woodland, which you can probably hear the birds behind me singing. But it's a lovely little spot, actually, the peninsula, if you've never been. It's a bit like Kielder in a microcosm. It's got this lovely bit of woodland. It's got some open moorland. You can find some remains of a prehistoric settlement, farm. And you can also look up and you can see one of the border mires, Falstone Moss. So it's quite an interesting little spot in itself. But I'm here to talk to you about the ospreys. And if you come down to the water's edge, you can look across with your binoculars or a scope and you can pick out one of our nests, which is on the opposite side of the water. It's currently got 2 chicks on there, so the adults have got 2 chicks that hatched over this last weekend. It's a beautiful day here in Kielder. It's sunny, it's warm. I see members of the sailing club out and about, but it hasn't been like that until recently. It's been really, really hard going, so let's hope for better weather. Not too hot, in fact, so that these chicks have a chance of survival. So I present Northumberland Wildlife Trust on the Kielder Osprey partnership. We work with Forestry England and Northumbrian Water, Calvert Kielder and the Kielder Water and Forest Park Development Trust to look after these birds and to tell the public about them and to provide them with a bright future. Ospreys, if you don't know what one looks like, they're a big bird. They've got a wingspan of about 1.7 metres. They've got sort of brown backs and a light underbelly. And people quite often see maybe a buzzard and think that's an osprey because of the brown and white. Or they'll see a gull. Ospreys have a characteristic sort of M shape to their wings when they're flying, a bit like a gull. But obviously they're much, much bigger. And then when they see an osprey, they're like, oh no, that's definitely an osprey. And they are exclusively fish eating, which is why Kielder is such a good place for them, because it's stocked with rainbow trout by Northumbrian Water. And this provides a really good food source for them. And then, of course, the big size of the forest gives them lots of nesting opportunities. So ospreys were persecuted into extinction in England about 200 years ago. And that was largely egg collectors, taxidermists, and just people who just didn't want ospreys around. And actually, some of those factors are still at play today. But anyway, so 200 years ago in England, and in 1916 was the last sort of recorded nest in Scotland before they were wiped out. And then the birds made their way back to Scotland, and we think probably from Scandinavia in the 1950s. And it took quite a long time before the population started to build in Scotland. But it did build, and there's now, we think, about 200 pairs in Scotland. And so in the sort of early 2000s, staff at Forestry England would see birds coming back from the migration, and they go to sort of West Africa, southern Iberia, Morocco, that part, the warmer south. Anyway, staff would see them coming back, and they've wondered, can we attract them to stay here in Kielder? So they erected nesting platforms. They built a nest on top of it, splatter it with white paint so it looks like ospreys have nested in it before. It looks like it's covered in poo, to put it bluntly. And that makes it very attractive for any birds flying over, because they think, oh, this is a good place to nest. It's worked before. So they come and have a look. So in 2008, the first pair attempted to nest, but they weren't successful. But then in 2009, we had our first nest, and they raised 3 chicks, which were the first chicks in Northumberland for over 200 years, which is just astonishing. And now we have 6 nests active this year. And we've had, I believe, over 70 chicks fledged over the years since, which is just amazing. And we're contributing to the recovery of this species throughout the UK, which is just wonderful. And the future is bright for them. That's not to say they don't face threats. I'm sure you've heard about, there was a nest in Wales that was cut down earlier this year. But, we keep our eyes on them here. They're pretty safe at Kielder due to the size and the scale of the place. So, if you want to see the ospreys, unfortunately, we're not running Osprey Watch this year, but we are at the moment, thanks to funding from Northumberland Water, building a new viewpoint here at Tower Now to look across to this new nest. And we'll have a live link from the nest there. We'll have all sorts of facilities there. It's not finished yet, so please just keep your ears open for when that's ready. But in the meantime, you can visit Kielder Castle, where they've got screens showing I think 2 nests they've got on live feed there. And if you can't visit Kielder, we do also have our blog, which is www.kielderospreys.com. That's kielderospreys.wordpress.com. And that has everything you could ever want to know. And that's largely written by our wonderful volunteer, Joanna, who is the guru on all things Kielder Osprey. And we are very, very lucky to have her. So, I hope you can come up and see them for yourselves. If you can't, like I say, please do keep an eye on the website, and that will give you all the information. But thank you for your interest.
It does feel like summer, and all is well in the world as the late spring breeze wafts the lovely scents of the garden and the countryside in through our windows. But hang on, watch out, Tom's about, with his health and safety hat on and some very wise advice that really we all need to listen to. Over to you, Tom.
I'm trying to give a heads up on dangers lurking in everybody's garden. And I just mentioned heads cutting and the residual current device for breaking the circuit. Moving on from that, for goodness sake, use appropriate gear for different jobs. And if you're cutting hedges, there's got to be a face shield or eye shields to protect your eyes. And there have to be gloves, of course. And with the mower, suitable footwear. Don't cut the grass, try cutting the grass with flip-flops or soft shoes on. Those blades are there and your feet are in danger at every turn. And if there's something clogs up the hedge cutters or the lawnmower, for goodness sake, turn them off before you put your fingers anywhere near those blades. Stranger things have happened, believe me. And then we'll get on to the chemicals that, and especially with children, don't leave chemicals lying around, for goodness sake. Pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, things like that, because some of them can't yet read, especially younger children, and that could be fatal. And don't dispense any liquid weed killers or anything like that into a bottle or something and not label them. Don't dispense them at all. Keep them in the container and keep it out of sight, locked away. And a simple thing like lifting. So many accidents occur because people are lifting heavy pots. Pots is on this RoSPA list of lifting pots and containers. Back problems, etc. are caused by it, and that's high on the list of the key things that cause accidents in the garden. Amazing. Thinking of children, ornamental ponds. You can think of the danger yourself no matter what the depth. If there are children around ornamental ponds by themselves, or barbecues where there's a fire going. These are real hotspots, literally hotspots, and things you should be thinking about. Safe place in the garden? Not quite, but it is if you take these precautions. Worst of all, I guess, because they look so friendly and so attractive, are the plants in the garden. And, it was the 17th century herbalist Gerard said, appearances are not always to be trusted. And how right he was about that. Children learning at the hand-to-mouth stage, where they touch things or pick things up and they seem to automatically put it towards their mouth to test its properties, I suppose. Any ingestion of any leaves or plants in the garden. You see, plants can't move about. They're in one place, they're static. So they have to protect themselves against animals which nibble the leaves and insects which suck the sap. So what do? Nature has provided them with chemicals in their sap which are poisonous to humans as well as those animals to deter us from eating them. And my goodness, you'd be amazed by the number of commoner garden plants that come on the list of poisonous. We all know about rhubarb, the leaves containing oxalic acid, and we all know, I'm sure, about the stinging nettle containing formic acid and histamine. The histamine gives you the spots, the formic acid gives you the pain, and very difficult. You just got to bear with it if you've touched a nettle. That should be warning enough for us. But then we look at things like the hellebore, which is poisonous, the Christmas rose, the Lenten rose, and the laburnum, that lovely laburnum, which is great panicles now of golden yellow flowers, just flowering. All of that plant is poisonous. It contains an alkaloid, poisonous alkaloid called cytosine, and it does untold damage to your body. By the way, most of the poisons, the majority of them, are alkaloids, and over time scientists have identified 5,000 different alkaloids. Amazingly, sometimes it's one alkaloid that causes the damage to humankind, sometimes it's a combination of them. Most of the bulbs have poisonous alkaloids in them. This is why if you go to buy them in the autumn at the garden centre, there are plastic gloves to wear, gloves of some description to keep your hands clean. So plants, there's a whole range of them, but if you want to find out more about plants, please visit the Poison Garden in Alnwick Garden. I'm a voluntary guide there occasionally during the week, and but there are staff guides there as well, and they'll talk to them, ask them, give them your problems about plants, and they'll explain things to you. It's really worth a visit there. And if you're gardening, for goodness sake, wash your hands. Can you imagine the scenario where you've touched the plants, you've been handling plants all of the time, bare hands, should have gloves on, really, bare hands, and some kind person comes over and said, have a cup of coffee or tea and a biscuit. And you forget all about washing your hands, biscuit to mouth, chew it, swallow it, ingest it. What's gone in with the biscuit? Which plant have you been touching? Dangerous. Wash your hands when you've been gardening.
Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology is checking out bird songs this week, and he's been listening to some of the well-known romantic tunes of our feathered friends and to some of the songs that we may not know quite so well. So, Tom, why do the birds sing?
As I've mentioned before, I spend quite a lot of my time doing bird surveys, both as a as a professional freelancer surveyor and as a really quite a committed volunteer. And people often ask about, well, how do you count birds? How do you survey birds? Actually, a lot of times, particularly in the winter time, it's quite easy because you're out on the mud flats or wherever, and you can visually sort of check birds. But actually, in the breeding season during the summertime, it's more about listening. And it's quite funny. I reckon in all of my survey work, I'll probably sort of get to the point where 85 to 95% of my registrations, if you like, are done by ear. And birds have got kind of a great range of noises they make. Calls, and there's alarm calls, and there's songs, and it's generally sort of in the kind of the category of vocalizations as it's known these days. But yes, it's quite a fascinating one, how these things have kind of worked out. So we've got different noises as we've talked about, and there's calls, so there's contact calls. That's a classic in geese, really, when they're flying on migration. When you in the autumn and you hear the pink feet coming, and they're making their sort of honking noise as they keep in touch. And same with whooper swans, and they're making the noise as they keep in touch with their groups. So that's quite important. And when you think about the other calls that they make, sometimes they're alarm calls. And it's kind of classic in blackbirds and woodpeckers. They have this chuck, 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 chuck sort of noises. And that's kind of as much to keep their families in check and make sure that they know that there's some threat coming along. And indeed, some of their pals, they might need to know about what's happening there. But it's absolutely fascinating, really, when you hear about all those little chirps and tweets and all that sort of stuff. And to learn them, it takes you quite a while to get them in your head, and you forget them, and you kind of remind yourself over the years. And some of the common ones you never forget, but some of the less common ones you have to kind of relearn every year. But the classic is got to be sort of singing birds, and the birds sing for a great chunk of the year. In robins, for example, they have a winter song, and it's quite fascinating, that one. But generally speaking, what I'm thinking about is the kind of the classic singing bird. There's two main reasons. One is they're setting up their territories, and so they're trying to sort of keep their kind of their colleagues or their kind of the competition out of the way. But also they're looking to attract a mate, and that is quite crucial. And some of the sweetest singers don't necessarily make the best partners, so they don't always succeed. And there's an awful lot of birdsong around. And but yes, it's quite interesting how that whole thing works. And singing birds have really become part of our kind of culture, and we all recognise that the kind of the songs of our kind of recent history, sort of My Old Man, for example, followed the van, and the old cock linnet was in a cage. And really, not so many years ago, cock linnets, which have got a fabulous, sweet song, it really have, and they were kept in cages, really quite small cages, which is quite sad. But they were kept in cages, and they were held outside people's houses and inside houses, and people just enjoyed hearing them singing. And of course, the skylark is another wonderful song. And who cannot be blessed by hearing a skylark, their first skylark in spring? And indeed, it's been an inspiration for many a composer, and one in particular, who created the Lark Ascending. Now, that is a fabulous piece of music, I have to say, and it's kind of inspired by the lark singing, the skylark singing sort of high in the sky, and they have this wonderful way of flying high in the sky just to descend and just make their song. And of course, in the north of England, we don't know really very much about the nightingale, but in south from Yorkshire south in the UK and right across Europe, the nightingale is a regular species. And again, there was a song that the nightingale sang in Berkeley Square, which is the centre of London, and particularly during the Blitz. And this became quite evocative in terms of the Blitz spirit. But it's fascinating how our lives have become kind of mixed with the song of birds. And some birds are kind of, their names are onomatopoeic. They're named after the sound they make. And think of kittiwakes, that wonderful seagull which breeds out in the offshore islands, indeed in Newcastle. And if you listen carefully, you'll hear them make their kitty kitty kittiwake, 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 and that's how they've got their name. And of course, cuckoos. We know cuckoo is a kind of classic song of the spring, and it's the male who makes that noise, the cuckoo, cuckoo noise. But the females have a sweet bubbling noise they make as well. And it's wonderful, it's fabulous. But also the curlew, the classic song of or the call of the upland moors of the UK, and a species which is in some decline in these parts. But we do get them wintering in this country, and they winter. They come from Northern Europe to winter here, and the British birds actually will leave the country. But the call of the curlew is just so evocative of the kind of the lonely moors of upland Britain. Absolutely fabulous sort of noises they make. Some birds are incredible mimics, just like the starling. You know, they can mimic other birds and indeed mechanical noises, and there's some great sort of kind of classics of the trimphone back in the day. But there's other species from far away, like the whipbird in Australia, which imitates things like chainsaws, for example. You know, they can develop all those sort of noises, and it's not just the voice or the throat that makes the noise. There's some species will actually make a noise in other ways, like snipe, which is a wading bird. It breeds in wet flushes on uplands and indeed on some lowlands. And there's the snipe drumming is something which is quite sort of it brings a little sort of tingle in my heart, because but they make the noise by vibrating their outer tail feathers, and there's a that's not a very good impersonation. Sorry about that. But there's other birds their songs and their calls are so high they're undiscernible by the human ear. Others are so low, like the bittern. The boom boom bittern booming is quite an infamous sort of noise they make. So there's a huge sort of raft of ways we can sort of identify birds and identify territories for birds. And I know it's kind of daunting if you've not really got into kind of learning songs and calls, but you could actually find it rewarding if you spent a bit of time just thinking about things. The common birds, you know, you get to learn the common birds. The dunnock, for example, one of the most common birds we find in the garden, has got the most sweetest sound, the most sweetest song. It's an incredibly underrated bird. If you spend a bit of time learning a few bird calls, a few bird songs, it will enrich your life. That's without a doubt. So my advice is go and try it. Learn some bird songs and you'll never look back.
Here's Tom with some things to be getting on with in the garden.
Well, there's jobs for the week. And given the scorching days we've had recently in relation to days in the past, it's really been warm summers here at last. Water is a thing that's mainly required by plants, whether it's those crops coming on in the greenhouse, the vegetables outside, or containers you've planted, bedding plants you put out, or the plants in the borders. I have a group of pyrethrum, beautiful pink flowers. They're just opened up now, and you know they're drooping every day. I'm having to put can after can of water in to keep them upright. It's really a while since we've had a considerable amount of water, and that is so important. So keep on top of the watering. The tomatoes in the greenhouse got maybe about 15, 16 of the plants, and they're growing quite well. The flowers are setting and the first little fruits are setting, but I wait till they get about thumbnail sized and I start feeding, and not until then. Let one or two fruits set first, because there's sufficient compost in the pot to keep the plant going for a short while. Then, of course, the feeding has to kick in to get those fruits swelling. That's the tomatoes. The peppers, I've got some 1 or 2 peppers in there in pots, and there's the first sign of green fly. And I try not to spray insecticides on them, so I go for the old way of doing it with soft soap. So it's after washing up, fill the hand spray up, and they don't like to have a bath, green fly, they don't like it at all. It tends to deter the colony. So that's my safe way of doing it, but you really deal with it the best way you think fit. Also in the greenhouse, the vines, there's so many side shoots coming. There's lots of bunches, embryo bunches formed, but there's lots of side shoots, and I'm getting rid of those every day so that no energy for food goes into growing more stems. I want all of the food to go into the bunches of grapes, so remove those side shoots as soon as you see them, and they keep on coming day after day. The peach, I've just thinned out the fruits. I didn't want lots of little fruits. They're above golf ball size already, but the fewer fruits they have, the bigger they get, and the more delicious, of course. So I'm doing that. But outside in the open, the apple, the pear, the plum, they're all suffering. Well, not suffering, it's a good thing for them, the June drop. All those little fruitlets have set, but nature has a way of getting rid of a lot of them so that the plant has fewer bigger fruits for your benefit. So I'm seeing under the pear tree tiny fruits, they've just dropped, and I'm also seeing that under the plum and the apple especially. And if you just rub a little cluster of apples, those that are ready to fall will go, and leaving 2 or 3 apples which will go on to get a large size. Soft fruits, ready to net those, especially the strawberries. The blackbirds are showing some interest in them already. Must get a net out. I don't want to share too many with them. We've worked hard to get them there, so they're coming up to ripening within the next couple of weeks, I'd say. Wimbledon, eat your heart out. Wimbledon strawberries, eh? Veggies, they're slow in moving quite a lot. Even the crops in the field locally have been slow to grow. But I'm watering those, and they're picking up now, which is good news for me. Containers and bedding, the containers especially, do not let them dry out. That's so important. Once they dry out, it undermines the health of the plants in those containers. So it's a daily job. I'm watering the tomatoes twice daily, once in the morning and once in the evening, because they've dried out so quickly. Amazing. Out in the garden, I'm enjoying flowers of June. It's just brilliant. I'm taking softwood cuttings, by the way, of several shrubs, because they're softwood cuttings now. You start off this time of year with softwood stem cuttings. About the middle of summer to touching autumn, they're semi-hardwood cuttings, and then of course in October, November, hardwood stem cuttings straight into the garden soil. But these ones at the moment, the softwood cuttings, they'll even root in water. If you put a bunch of them in a container, in a jar of water, they'll root in that. I'm looking at the shrubs. Mexican orange blossom, the Choicia ternata. It's a covered in beautiful bloom and highly fragrant at the moment. Joy to behold. Spirea arguta, the bridal wreath. It's covered in white as well, and also the lilac, Madame Lemoire, the double white lilac. It's flowering gorgeous. But best of all, the Californian lilac, the Ceanothus concha, a massive blue. There are literally thousands of blooms on it, and it's plant of the month for me, I'll tell you. And not only that, there are lots of bees on it as well, different species. It's a lovely time to be gardening. Whatever you are doing this coming week, enjoy your gardening.
You've been listening to Gardener Tom Pattinson, Birder Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology, and Katie Bark from the Northumberland Wildlife Trust. I'm Carl Steinson, and do check out our Twitter and Facebook page, The Nature Garden, and we'll be back soon. And in the meantime, enjoy your gardening and time outdoors with nature. Bye for now.